I have spent 2 years learning to live with silence, but nothing prepared me for the silence that poured from that train. It came to a stop with the groan of iron and the hiss of steam, and when the doors opened, there was no one inside. I stood on the platform at Thornwick Station, my black gloves clutching Thomas's last letter, the one where he told me he would arrive on the 7:15 with Catherine, his bride-to-be, and that we would finally be a family again. The November wind cut through my morning dress as I watched the conductor step down from the locomotive, his face pale as milk. He looked at the empty carriages behind him as though he could not understand what he was seeing. Neither could I. I called out to him. I asked him where the passengers were. He shook his head and said he did not know. They had boarded in London. He had seen them himself. 43 souls, he said, including a young gentleman traveling with a pretty auburn-haired woman. My brother and his Catherine. They had boarded, and somewhere between London and Thornwick, they had vanished into the winter air like breath on a cold morning. The station master came running, then the constable, then men I did not recognize, men in dark coats who spoke in low voices and looked at me as though I were an inconvenience. I demanded answers. I demanded to see the passenger manifest. I demanded to know how an entire train could arrive without a single living soul aboard. No one would tell me anything. They guided me to a bench inside the station, brought me weak tea that I did not drink, and spoke around me as though I were not there. A woman in mourning, they must have thought. A widow. Fragile. Best not to upset her further. I wanted to scream at them that I had buried a husband and survived, that I had learned to manage an estate alone, that I was not some delicate creature who would shatter at the first sign of trouble. But I did not scream. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, and I listened. That was when I first heard his name. The Earl of Ravensfield, someone whispered. He was here earlier. Saw him speaking with Mr. Pemberton in the office. Another voice, lower still. Took something, did he not? A paper of some kind. The first voice again, sharp with warning. Quiet. He will hear you. I turned my head toward the station master's office. The door was closed, but through the frosted glass I could see the silhouette of a tall man, broad-shouldered, standing motionless. He was watching me. I could feel his gaze even through the distortion of the glass, heavy and deliberate, as though he were taking my measure. Then the silhouette moved, and the door opened, and he stepped into the light. Marcus Blackwood, the Earl of Ravensfield, was not a handsome man in the way that poets write about. His features were too severe, his jaw too sharp, his dark hair touched with early gray at the temples, though he could not have been more than 35. But there was a presence to him, a weight, as though the air around him bent to accommodate his existence. He wore a black coat that seemed to absorb the lamplight, and his eyes, when they met mine across the crowded station, were the color of winter storms. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked away and walked past me, past the constable who tried to stop him with questions, past the station master who called out his name and disappeared into the night. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the parlor of Ashworth House, the home I had shared with my husband before his death, and now shared with no one but the servants, and I read Thomas's letter over and over until the words blurred. He had sounded so happy. Catherine is everything I hoped for, he had written. She is kind and clever, and laughs at my terrible jokes. I cannot wait for you to meet her, Ellie. I cannot wait for you to have a sister again. A sister. After our mother died when I was 17 and Thomas was 12, and our father drank himself into the grave 3 years later, we had only each other. I had married Captain Edward Ashworth, not for love, but for security, for the promise that Thomas would have a home and an education and a future. Edward was not a cruel man, but he was distant, more interested in his hunting parties and his club than in me. When he died in that accident, thrown from his horse during a hunt, I felt more relief than grief. I am not proud of that, but it is the truth. Thomas was supposed to be my second chance. He was supposed to bring Catherine to Ashworth House, and together we would fill these empty rooms with laughter and children and life. Instead, he had vanished somewhere between London and here, and no one would tell me why. The next morning, I went back to the station. The platform had been cleared, the train moved to a siding somewhere out of sight. Mr. Pemberton, the station master, was a nervous little man with thinning hair and ink-stained fingers. He would not meet my eyes when I asked to see the passenger manifest. "I am afraid that is not possible, Mrs. Ashworth," he said. "The matter is under investigation. Official channels, you understand." "I do not understand," I told him. "My brother was on that train. I have a right to know what happened to him." He shuffled papers on his desk, arranging and rearranging them without purpose. "I wish I could help you, madam. Truly I do, but there are certain matters that are beyond my authority." "What matters? What are you hiding?" He flinched as though I had struck him. "I am hiding nothing. Please, you must go home and wait for news. When there is something to tell, you will be informed." I leaned across his desk, close enough to smell the fear on him, the sour tang of sweat beneath his cheap cologne. "Who was here last night, Mr. Pemberton? Who came into this office before the authorities arrived?" His face went pale. "I do not know what you mean. The Earl of Ravensfield. I saw him leaving. What did he take from you?" For a moment, I thought he would tell me. His mouth opened, and something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been guilt or might have been terror. Then the door behind me opened, and a cold draft swept through the room, and Mr. Pemberton's expression shuttered closed like a window against a storm. "Mrs. Ashworth," a voice said behind me. A deep voice, quiet and controlled, with an edge beneath it like a blade wrapped in velvet. "I believe the station master has made it clear that he cannot assist you." I turned. The Earl of Ravensfield stood in the doorway, his tall frame blocking the gray morning light. He was dressed in riding clothes, his boots splashed with mud, and there was color in his cheeks from the cold. Up close, I could see the lines around his eyes, the weariness etched into his features. He looked like a man who had not slept well in a very long time. "Lord Ravensfield," I said, "I did not expect to see you here, and yet here I am." He stepped into the office, and Mr. Pemberton practically scrambled out of his chair to make room. The Earl ignored him entirely. His attention was fixed on me, those storm-gray eyes searching my face with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "You are the widow of Captain Ashworth, are you not?" "I am. My condolences on your loss." His tone was formal, correct, entirely without warmth. "I knew your husband. We hunted together once or twice." "Did you?" I did not bother to hide the coldness in my own voice. "Then perhaps you can tell me something useful, my lord. Perhaps you can tell me why my brother has disappeared and no one will give me answers." Something shifted in his expression, a tightening around the mouth, a slight narrowing of the eyes. If I blinked, I would have missed it. "I cannot tell you what I do not know, Mrs. Ashworth. You were here last night, before anyone else, before the constable, before the investigators. You took something from this office." Mr. Pemberton made a small, strangled sound. The Earl did not look at him. He did not look away from me. "You are mistaken," he said quietly. "I am not." We stood there, the two of us, separated by less than 3 feet of dusty floorboards, and the silence between us was a living thing. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel the blood rushing in my ears. There was something in his gaze that I could not name, something that might have been warning or might have been something else entirely. Finally, he spoke again. "Go home, Mrs. Ashworth. There is nothing for you here, nothing but grief and questions that have no answers." "I will not accept that," I said. "Then you are a fool." His voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was heat beneath it now, banked fire waiting to catch. "This is not a matter for a woman alone. Go home, mourn your brother. Let the authorities do their work. The authorities are doing nothing. You are all doing nothing." He leaned closer, close enough that I could smell leather and wood smoke, and something darker, something that made me think of locked rooms and secrets kept in shadow. Perhaps, Mrs. Ashworth, there is a reason for that. Perhaps there are things happening here that you are better off not knowing. Perhaps I am trying to protect you. From what? I whispered. He held my gaze for 1 heartbeat. 2. Then he stepped back, and the spell was broken, and he was just a man again, cold and distant and unreadable. "Good day, Mrs. Ashworth," he said. "I do not expect we will meet again." He walked out without another word. Mr. Pemberton collapsed into his chair, mopping his forehead with a handkerchief. I stood alone in the middle of the office, my hands trembling, my mind racing. He knew something. He knew what had happened to that train, to Thomas, to all those missing passengers, and he was hiding it. I did not know why. I did not know what document he had taken or what secrets he was protecting. But I knew, with a certainty that settled into my bones like the November cold, that the Earl of Ravensfield was at the center of this mystery. And I knew something else too, something that troubled me more than I wanted to admit. When he had leaned close to me, when he had spoken those words about protecting me, I had felt something I had not felt in years, a spark, a quickening, a pull toward this cold, dangerous man that defied all reason and sense. I walked home through the gray morning, the frost crunching beneath my boots, and I told myself that I would find the truth about my brother no matter the cost. But somewhere in the back of my mind, a quieter voice whispered that the cost might be higher than I could imagine, and that the Earl of Ravensfield, for all his warnings, might not be my enemy at all. He might be something far more dangerous. The days that followed were a fog of letters and unanswered questions. I wrote to the railway company in London. I wrote to the constabulary. I wrote to Thomas's solicitor, to his friends, to anyone who might know something about what had happened on that train. The replies, when they came at all, were maddeningly vague. "The matter is under investigation. We are doing everything in our power. Please be patient." I was not patient. I could not be. On the 5th day, I received a visitor I did not expect. Mrs. Blackwood, the Dowager Countess of Ravensfield, arrived at Ashworth House in a carriage so fine it made my modest home look like a servant's cottage. She was a woman of 60 or so, with silver hair swept back from a face that must have been beautiful once and was now merely formidable. Her eyes were the same storm gray as her son's, but where his were guarded, hers were sharp as glass. She did not wait to be announced. She swept into my parlor as though she owned it, trailing the scent of lavender and something bitter beneath, and she looked around at my faded wallpaper and worn carpets with an expression of polite disdain. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said. Her voice was cool and precise, each word placed like a chess piece on a board. "I am the Countess of Ravensfield. I believe you have met my son." "I have," I said. "I did not offer her tea. I did not ask her to sit. Forgive me, my lady, but I was not expecting company." She sat anyway, arranging her skirts on my best chair with the air of a queen settling onto a throne. "I am not here for pleasantries, Mrs. Ashworth. I am here because you have been asking questions about the incident at the station. Questions that are causing considerable inconvenience to certain people." "My brother disappeared," I said. "I think I am entitled to ask questions." "Entitled." She repeated the word as though it tasted sour. What a charming notion. "Let me be direct with you, Mrs. Ashworth. Your brother is gone. Whether he is dead or merely missing, no one can say. But pursuing this matter will not bring him back. It will only bring you grief and trouble." I felt my hands curl into fists at my sides. "Is that a warning, my lady?" "It is advice." She met my eyes without flinching. "I have lived long enough to know when a battle cannot be won. You are young. You are alone. You have no family, no protector, no resources to speak of. If you continue down this path, you will be crushed, and no one will mourn you, except perhaps your servants. The cruelty of her words stole my breath. I stood there, trembling with fury and something else, something that might have been fear, and I thought about all the years I had spent being small and quiet and obedient. I had been a dutiful daughter, a dutiful wife. I had swallowed my own desires and dreams and told myself that this was what women did. This was how we survived. But Thomas was all I had left, and I would not let them take him from me without a fight. "Your son," I said slowly, "was at the station the night the train arrived. He took a document from the station master's office. I want to know what was in that document." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "You are more observant than I expected. I am more determined than you expected, my lady, and I will not stop until I have answers." She studied me for a long moment, her gray eyes unreadable. Then she rose, smoothing her gloves with deliberate care. "My son is a complicated man, Mrs. Ashworth. He has suffered greatly in his life, and he carries burdens you cannot imagine. But he is not your enemy. If you are wise, you will accept that and leave this matter alone." She walked to the door, then paused, her hand on the frame. "One more thing," she said, without turning. "My son has not looked at a woman, truly looked at her, since his wife died 5 years ago. But he looked at you in that station. I saw it in his face when he returned home. Whatever you think you know about him, whatever you think is happening here, remember that. He is not as cold as he pretends to be." Then she was gone, leaving nothing behind but the fading scent of lavender and 1,000 new questions. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about what the dowager had said. "My son has suffered greatly. He carries burdens you cannot imagine." What burdens? What suffering? I knew only the basic facts about the Earl of Ravensfield. He had inherited the title young, at 22, when his father died of a fever. He had married at 25, a love match by all accounts, to a woman named Arabella, who was said to be the most beautiful girl in 3 counties. She had died in childbirth 4 years later, along with the baby, and he had not remarried. He kept to his estate. He attended no parties, no balls, no social gatherings. The county whispered about him, called him cold, called him proud, but no one seemed to know him. And now he was at the center of a mystery that had swallowed my brother whole. The next morning, I did something reckless. I hired a carriage and drove to Ravensfield Manor. The estate was vast, sprawling across the hills north of Thornwick like a slumbering beast. The main house was a monument of gray stone and climbing ivy, its windows blank and dark even in the pale winter sunlight. I had passed it many times over the years, but I had never been inside. The Ashworths were respectable but not wealthy, and the Blackwoods did not mingle with families like mine. The butler who answered the door looked at me as though I were a stray cat that had wandered onto the wrong doorstep. "Lord Ravensfield is not receiving visitors," he informed me, his tone suggesting that Lord Ravensfield would certainly not be receiving me. "Please tell him that Mrs. Ashworth is here," I said. "Tell him I will wait." I waited for nearly an hour. The butler showed me to a small sitting room off the main hall, a cold and cheerless space with heavy curtains drawn against the light. I sat on a hard chair and listened to the silence of the house, the creak of old timbers, the distant tick of a clock. This was a house in mourning, I realized. After 5 years, it was still wrapped in grief like a shroud. When the Earl finally appeared, he looked as though he had been dragged from bed. His dark hair was disheveled, his cravat loosely tied, and there were shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But his gaze, when it found mine, was as sharp and wary as ever. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said. His voice was flat. "You should not have come here." I stood. "I had no choice, my lord. No one else will tell me the truth." "The truth." He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You assume there is a truth to be told, Perhaps there is only confusion and tragedy and a great many questions that will never be answered. I do not believe that. I took a step toward him. I do not believe that you would go to the station in the middle of the night, take a document from the station master's office, and not know something about what happened to that train. His jaw tightened. You have been speaking with my mother. She came to warn me away, but she also said something interesting. She said you are not my enemy. Is that true? He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, something raw and unguarded that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I am not your enemy, he said quietly. But that does not mean I can help you. Cannot? Or will not? He turned away, walking to the window, his back to me. The curtains were heavy velvet, the color of dried blood, and they swallowed the light from outside. When he spoke again, his voice was low. Your husband, Captain Ashworth. How did he die? The question caught me off guard. In a hunting accident. His horse threw him. That is what you were told. That is what happened. I felt cold suddenly, a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. What are you saying? I am saying that there are powerful men in this county, Mrs. Ashworth. Men who build railways and factories and make fortunes on the backs of others. Men who do not like inconvenient questions. Your husband asked inconvenient questions, and now he is dead. I could not breathe. I could not think. Edward had never spoken to me about business, about railways, about anything that mattered. He had kept me at a distance, as he kept everything at a distance. But there had been something, in those last weeks before his death, a tension in him. Arguments behind closed doors with men I did not recognize, letters he burned without reading. You are saying Edward was murdered, I whispered. I am saying nothing. He turned to face me, and his expression was hard, closed off. I am saying only that you should go home and stop asking questions before the same thing happens to you. I crossed the distance between us before I knew what I was doing. I stood close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. You know who killed him, I said. You know, and you are protecting them. I am protecting you. I do not want your protection. I want the truth. Something broke in him then. I saw it happen, saw the careful control crack and shatter, and suddenly his hands were on my arms, gripping me hard enough to bruise. You foolish woman, he said, his voice rough. Do you not understand what you are dealing with? These men will destroy you. They will destroy everything you love. I have seen it happen. I have watched them do it. Then help me stop them. I cannot. The words seemed torn from him. I have my own reasons for staying silent, reasons I cannot explain. But please, Mrs. Ashworth, Eleanor, please go home. He had used my Christian name. It hung in the air between us, intimate and forbidden, and I realized that we were standing too close, that his hands were still on my arms, that something was passing between us that neither of us could name. What happened to your wife? I heard myself ask. The question came from somewhere deep inside me, some instinct that told me the answer mattered. His face went white. He released me so abruptly that I stumbled, catching myself on the back of a chair. Get out, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. Get out of my house. Lord Ravensfield, I said. Now. I left. I walked through the cold halls of Ravensfield Manor, past the butler who watched me with poorly concealed curiosity, out into the gray afternoon. The carriage was waiting where I had left it, the driver huddled against the wind, and I climbed inside and sat very still as we rattled back down the long drive. Something had happened in that room. Something important. The Earl knew about my husband's death, knew more than he was telling. He was afraid, I realized. Beneath all that coldness, all that control, Marcus Blackwood was afraid, not for himself, for me, and his wife. What did Arabella have to do with any of this? She had died in childbirth. Everyone knew that. But the look on his face when I asked the question, The way he had recoiled as though I had struck him, that was not grief. That was something else. That was guilt. I returned to Ashworth House as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Mrs. Henley, my housekeeper, met me at the door with worried eyes. "There is a letter for you, madam," she said. "It arrived while you were out. No return address." I took it from her and went to my study. My hands were steady as I broke the seal, but my heart was racing. The letter was short, written in a cramped hand I did not recognize. "Mrs. Ashworth," it read, "if you want to know what happened to the passengers on the London train, come to the old mill at Thornwick Bridge tomorrow night at 9 o'clock. Come alone. Tell no one. There are those who would see the truth buried, but I cannot stay silent any longer. Your brother is alive, but he will not be for much longer unless you act." I read the letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer of my desk, beside Thomas's last letter, beside the love I had thought I lost forever. My brother was alive. Someone knew where he was. And tomorrow night, I would find out who. The Earl had warned me to stop asking questions. He had told me I was in danger, that powerful men wanted me silent. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps I was walking into a trap. But Thomas was my brother. He was the only family I had left. And there was nothing in this world, no threat, no danger, no cold-eyed Earl with secrets in his heart, that would stop me from bringing him home. I went to bed that night and dreamed of train whistles and empty carriages and a man with storm-gray eyes who held my arms and called me by my name. "Eleanor," he had said. In my dream, he said it again. And in my dream, I answered. The old mill at Thornwick Bridge had been abandoned for as long as I could remember. It stood at the edge of the river, half swallowed by ivy and shadow, its great wheel frozen in place like the hand of a stopped clock. As a child, I had been warned never to go there. "The floors are rotted through," my mother used to say. "The walls could collapse at any moment. It is no place for a young lady." I was no longer a young lady. I was a widow with nothing left to lose except the brother I refused to believe was gone. I told Mrs. Henley I was retiring early with a headache. I waited until the house was dark and silent, then slipped out through the servants' entrance, wearing my plainest dress and a heavy wool cloak. The night was cold and clear, the stars sharp as needles against the black sky, and my breath came in white clouds as I made my way down the lane toward the river. The walk took nearly an hour. By the time I reached the bridge, my feet were numb and my fingers ached inside my gloves. The mill loomed ahead, darker than the darkness around it, and for a moment my courage faltered. This was madness. I was walking alone into a trap, armed with nothing but desperation and hope. If the letter was a lie, if there was no one waiting to help me, I could disappear just as Thomas had disappeared, and no one would ever know what had become of me. But if Thomas was alive, if there was even the smallest chance that I could save him, I had to try. I crossed the bridge and approached the mill. The door hung crooked on its hinges, and when I pushed it open, the smell hit me first, damp and rot, and something else, something chemical that burned my nose. I stepped inside, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness, and I saw that I was not alone. A man stood in the corner, half hidden by shadow. He was thin and nervous-looking, with a clerk's pallid complexion and ink-stained fingers. When he saw me, he let out a breath of relief. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said, "thank God. I was afraid you would not come." "Who are you?" I asked. My voice sounded strange in the empty space, flat and echoless. "My name is Horace Whittle. I was a clerk for the Northern Counties Railway Company until last week when I discovered what they have been doing." He stepped forward into a shaft of moonlight that fell through a gap in the roof, and I saw that his face was bruised, his lips split. Someone had beaten him recently and badly. "They tried to silence me," he said, following my gaze. "But I managed to get away. I have been hiding ever since. When I heard that you were asking questions about the train, I knew I had to find you. You said my brother is alive. Where is he? He is being held at Blackmore House, about 10 miles north of here. It is a private sanatorium, or at least that is what they call it. In truth, it is a prison for those who know too much. I do not understand. Why would anyone take the passengers from a train and imprison them? Because of what they saw. He glanced toward the door, his eyes darting like a frightened animal. The railway company has been cutting corners for years, Mrs. Ashworth, using inferior materials, bribing inspectors, building tracks that are not safe. 3 months ago, there was an accident. A section of track collapsed near Millbrook Junction, and a freight train derailed. 12 men were killed, workers mostly, men whose lives did not matter to the company directors. I felt sick. And the passengers on the London train? They were witnesses. The train was diverted through Millbrook Junction that night. The passengers saw the wreckage, they saw the bodies, and they saw something else. He paused, licking his cracked lips. They saw the men who were there covering it up. Important men. Men whose names you would recognize. Who? Sir Reginald Hartley, Mr. Cecil Drummond, and, he hesitated, the Earl of Ravensfield. The world tilted beneath my feet. No, I said, that is not possible. I saw the documents myself. Lord Ravensfield is an investor in the Northern Counties Railway. He has been profiting from their corruption for years. When the accident happened, he was part of the group that decided to make the witnesses disappear. I thought of Marcus in his study, his hands on my arms, his voice rough with what I had believed was concern. I am protecting you, he had said. Had it all been a lie? Had he been protecting not me, but himself? The document he took from the station, I said slowly. What was it? A passenger manifest. The original, with the names of everyone who was on that train. The company needed it destroyed so there would be no official record of who had vanished. And my husband, Captain Ashworth, was he involved in this? Whittle shook his head. The opposite. Your husband discovered what the company was doing. He threatened to expose them. That is why he stopped. That is why they killed him, I finished. My voice was steady, but inside I was crumbling. Edward, my distant, difficult husband, who had kept me at arm's length for the entirety of our marriage. He had been trying to do the right thing, and they had murdered him for it. I have copies of the documents, Whittle said. Enough to bring them all down. Hartley, Drummond, Ravensfield, all of them. But I need help. I cannot go to the authorities alone. They have too much influence. I need someone respectable, someone they cannot dismiss. Someone like you. I will help you, I said. I will do whatever it takes. He smiled, a thin, desperate expression. Then we must move quickly. Tomorrow night. I will bring you the documents. Meet me here at the same time, and we will go to London together. We will find a journalist, a member of Parliament, someone who will listen. He moved toward the door, and I followed, my mind racing. Thomas was alive. He was being held prisoner, but he was alive. And the Earl of Ravensfield, the man who had looked at me with those storm-gray eyes, the man who had called me by my Christian name, was one of the men responsible. I stepped out into the cold night air, and that was when I heard it. The snap of a twig, the shuffle of boots on frozen ground, and then a voice, cutting through the darkness like a blade. Well, well, what have we here? 3 men emerged from the shadows beneath the bridge. They were rough-looking, dressed in laborers' clothes, and they carried clubs and knives that glinted in the moonlight. The largest of them, a barrel-chested brute with a scar across his face, grinned at me with broken teeth. "The widow Ashworth," he said. "We have been looking for you." Whittle made a small sound of terror. He turned to run, but one of the men was faster. A club swung through the air and connected with the back of his head, and he crumpled to the ground without a sound. "No!" I screamed, but the scarred man was already moving toward me, his hand closing around my arm with bruising force. "You should have stayed home," he said. You should have listened when they told you to stop asking questions. Now it is too late. I struggled, but he was too strong. He dragged me toward the mill, and I knew with terrible certainty that I was about to die. They would kill me as they had killed Edward. They would make me disappear, and Thomas would rot in that sanatorium, and no one would ever know the truth. Then I heard hoofbeats. They came fast and hard, thundering across the bridge, and suddenly there was a horse and rider bearing down on us, a dark shape against the darker sky. The scarred man cursed and released me, reaching for his knife, but he was too slow. The rider was upon him in an instant, and I saw the flash of a pistol, heard the crack of a shot, and the scarred man fell. The other two men scattered, running into the night like rats fleeing a fire. The rider did not pursue them. He swung down from his horse and strode toward me, and in the moonlight I saw his face. Marcus Blackwood. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. His voice was rough, ragged with something that might have been fear. I could not speak. I could only stare at him. This man I had thought was my enemy. This man who had just saved my life. He took my silence for shock and pulled me close, his hands moving over my arms, my shoulders, checking for injuries. "Eleanor," he said, "look at me. Are you hurt?" "You," I managed. "You are one of them," Whittle told me. "You are an investor. You knew about the accident, the cover-up." His face went still. "What else did he tell you?" "That you helped them take the passengers, that you took the manifest to protect yourself." He was silent for a long moment. Then he released me and stepped back, and I saw something in his expression that I had not expected. Pain. Deep and old and terrible. "I am an investor," he said quietly. "That much is true. But I did not know about the accident until after it happened. I did not know about the cover-up until it was too late." "Then why did you take the manifest?" "To protect the witnesses." He met my eyes, and I saw that he was telling the truth. The company wanted that list so they could track down anyone who escaped. I took it so they could not. But the passengers are imprisoned. Thomas is imprisoned. I know, and I have been trying to find a way to free them for weeks. But Hartley and Drummond have too much power. The sanatorium is guarded day and night. I cannot act openly without putting everyone at risk, including my mother, including the people who depend on me. I thought of the Dowager, her sharp eyes, her warnings. I thought of the vast estate of Ravensfield, the tenants and servants whose livelihoods depended on the Earl's protection. He was not simply a man. He was a shield for hundreds of people who had no other defense. "Your wife?" I said. "What happened to her?" He flinched as though I had struck him. "They killed her." His voice was barely audible. Arabella discovered what Hartley was doing. She was going to expose him. And he stopped, his jaw tightening. "They made it look like she died in childbirth. But she was murdered. My wife and my child were murdered, and I could not prove it. And I have had to live with that knowledge for 5 years. I felt something break inside me. All this time, I had thought him cold, thought him complicit. But he was a man destroyed by grief and guilt, a man who had been fighting alone against enemies too powerful to defeat. "Why did you not tell me?" I whispered. "Because I was trying to protect you." He laughed, a bitter sound. "As though I could protect anyone. I could not save Arabella. I could not save my child. How could I hope to save you?" I reached out and touched his face. It was an impulse, instinctive, and I felt him go still beneath my hand. His skin was cold from the night air, rough with stubble, and his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, were full of something that made my heart ache. "You saved me tonight," I said. "And tomorrow? The day after? Eleanor, these men will not stop. They will keep coming until you are silenced. Then we will stop them first." I let my hand fall. Together. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "We should go," he said. The men who attacked you will report back to Hartley. He will know you are getting close. What about Whittle?" We both looked toward the mill. The clerk was stirring, groaning, his hand pressed to the back of his head. Marcus helped him to his feet, and we managed to get him onto the horse. He was dazed but alive, mumbling about documents and proof. "I have a place we can take him," Marcus said. "A cottage on the edge of my estate. No one will find him there." We walked through the darkness, leading the horse. The clerk slumped in the saddle. The night was cold and silent around us, and I was aware of Marcus beside me, the warmth of his presence, the way his shoulder brushed mine as we walked. "I am sorry," he said suddenly, "for the way I spoke to you, for pushing you away. You were trying to protect me. I was trying to protect myself." He looked at me, and his expression was raw, unguarded. "I have not let anyone close in 5 years. I thought if I kept my distance, I could keep you safe. But you would not stay away. You kept pushing, kept demanding answers. And now? Now I think perhaps you are the bravest woman I have ever known." He paused, "and the most infuriating." I almost smiled. I will take that as a compliment. We reached the cottage as the first gray light of dawn was creeping over the hills. It was small but clean, with a fire laid ready in the hearth and blankets folded on the bed. Marcus settled Whittle by the fire and sent for a doctor he trusted, a man who would ask no questions. "Stay here," he told me. "Rest. I will come back this evening and we will make a plan." "I should go home," I said. "Mrs. Henley will worry. I will send word to her." He hesitated, then took my hand. His grip was firm and warm, and I felt something pass between us, something unspoken but undeniable. "Eleanor, I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but please trust me." I looked into his eyes, those eyes that had haunted my dreams, and I made my choice. "I trust you," I said. He raised my hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture that was formal and ancient and somehow more intimate than any embrace. Then he was gone, disappearing into the morning mist, and I was left alone with a wounded clerk, a dying fire, and the knowledge that everything had changed. My brother was alive, my husband had been murdered, and the man I had thought was my enemy had become something else entirely, something I was not ready to name, not yet. I slept fitfully in a chair by the fire, my dreams tangled with images of empty trains and men with clubs and Marcus's face in the moonlight. When I woke, the sun was high and Whittle was sitting up in bed, looking pale but alert. "The documents," he said as soon as he saw my eyes open. "I need to get the documents. Where are they?" "Hidden, in my lodgings in town." He tried to stand and immediately swayed, his hand going to his head. "I have to go back." "You cannot go anywhere," I told him. "You can barely walk. Tell me where they are, and I will retrieve them." He looked at me with something like wonder. "You would do that? After everything?" "My brother is in that sanatorium. I will do whatever is necessary to bring him home." He gave me the address and described the hiding place, a loose floorboard beneath the window in his rented room. "The documents are in a leather satchel," he said. "Everything is there. Contracts, letters, financial records, enough to destroy them all." I waited until evening, when the streets would be quieter and I could move without being noticed. Marcus had not returned, and I told myself I was not disappointed. He had his own burdens, his own battles. I could not expect him to fight mine as well. But when I opened the cottage door, ready to slip out into the twilight, he was there. He stood in the lane, his horse behind him, and he looked as though he had not slept at all. His dark hair was windswept, his coat dusty from riding, and there were shadows beneath his eyes that made him look older than his years. "Where are you going?" he asked. "To retrieve the documents. Whittle told me where they are hidden." "Alone?" I lifted my chin. "I am capable of walking through town, my lord. I do not doubt your capability." His voice was quiet, steady. "I doubt the wisdom of walking into what may well be a trap." I hesitated. You think they are watching his lodgings? I know they are. I had my man observe the building this afternoon. There are 2 men posted across the street, watching everyone who comes and goes. My heart sank. Then how are we supposed to get the documents? We create a distraction. He stepped closer, and I caught the scent of him, leather and wood smoke and something else, something warm and indefinably male. I will draw them away. You will have perhaps 10 minutes to get inside, find the satchel, and get out. That is not enough time. It will have to be. He met my eyes, and I saw the same fear I felt reflected back at me. Eleanor, if something goes wrong, if you are caught, do not try to be brave. Run. Get out of there and do not look back. And leave you? Yes. His jaw tightened. Promise me. I could not promise him that. I could not promise to abandon him, not after everything. But I nodded, because I knew he needed to hear it, and because I understood what it cost him to let me take this risk. We rode into town together, sharing his horse, my arms wrapped around his waist to keep from falling. It was improper. It was scandalous. And I did not care. The warmth of his body against mine was the only comfort I had in a world that had become cold and dangerous, and I held on to it like a lifeline. He left me in an alley 2 streets from Whittle's lodgings. 10 minutes, he said again, no more. Then he was gone, riding toward the men who watched the building, and I was alone in the darkness with my fear and my determination. I counted to 100, giving him time to draw their attention. Then I moved. The building was a shabby boarding house, the kind of place where clerks and shop assistants lived in cramped rooms and shared a single washroom at the end of the hall. The front door was unlocked. I slipped inside and climbed the stairs, my footsteps soft on the worn carpet, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain everyone in the building could hear it. Whittle's room was on the 3rd floor. The door was locked, but the lock was old and cheap, and I had brought a hairpin for precisely this purpose. I had learned to pick locks as a girl, a skill my mother would have been horrified to discover. It had seemed like a game then. Now it was saving my life. The lock clicked open. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. The room was small and bare, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. I went straight to the window and knelt, running my fingers along the floorboards until I found the one that was loose. It came up easily, revealing a dark space beneath. The satchel was there, just as Whittle had promised. I pulled it out, checked that the documents were inside, and allowed myself one moment of relief. Then I heard footsteps in the hall. I froze. The footsteps came closer, stopped outside the door. I heard voices, low and urgent, and then the rattle of the doorknob. They had found me. I looked around desperately. The window was my only option. I threw it open and looked down. 3 stories. A fall from this height would kill me or cripple me. But there was a drainpipe running down the side of the building, and a narrow ledge that connected to the roof of the building next door. I climbed out onto the ledge just as the door burst open behind me. The wind was bitter, cutting through my cloak, numbing my fingers as I clung to the rough brick. I heard shouts behind me, saw a man's head appear in the window, but I did not look back. I inched along the ledge, my feet sliding on the frost-slicked stone, my hands scraping against the wall. The satchel was slung across my body, banging against my hip with every movement. I reached the drainpipe and wrapped my arms around it. The metal was icy, biting into my palms even through my gloves, but I held on. I began to climb down, hand over hand, my muscles screaming in protest. Halfway down, the pipe groaned. I felt it shift beneath my weight, felt the brackets pulling away from the wall, and for one terrible moment I thought it was going to give way entirely. Then there were hands on my waist, strong hands, pulling me down, catching me as I fell the last few feet. I stumbled against a solid chest, and I looked up into Marcus's face. "I told you to run," he said. His voice was rough, but his hands were gentle as they steadied me. I did run. I ran down a drain pipe. He stared at me for a moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. It was a real laugh, warm and surprised, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, made him look like the man he might have been if tragedy had not hardened him. "You are impossible," he said, "so I have been told." He took my hand, and we ran through the dark streets together, the satchel bouncing against my side, the shouts of our pursuers fading behind us. We reached his horse and mounted, and we rode hard out of town into the countryside, into the safety of the night. We returned to the cottage where Whittle was waiting anxiously. When he saw the satchel, he nearly wept with relief. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." We spent the next hours poring over the documents by candlelight. They were everything Whittle had promised and more. Letters between Hartley and Drummond discussing the cover-up, financial records showing bribes paid to inspectors and officials, and a map, hand-drawn, showing the location of Blackmore House and the layout of its grounds. "This is it," I said. "This is enough to bring them down." Marcus nodded, but his expression was grim. "We still need to free the prisoners. If we go to the authorities now, Hartley will have warning. He will move them, or worse. Then we free them first." I looked at the map, tracing the lines of walls and buildings. "Tomorrow night, before they know we have the documents. It is too dangerous," Marcus said. "The sanatorium is guarded. We would need a small army to break in, or a very good plan." We argued for hours. Marcus wanted to wait, to gather more men, to approach cautiously. I wanted to act immediately, before Hartley could strike again. In the end, we compromised. We would go tomorrow night, just the two of us, using the cover of darkness and the element of surprise. Marcus knew a man who could provide horses and weapons. Whittle would stay behind, guarding the documents, ready to take them to London if we did not return. When the plan was set, Whittle retired to his bed, exhausted. Marcus and I sat by the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I should apologize," he said finally. "For what?" "For doubting you. For underestimating you." He turned to look at me, and the firelight caught the angles of his face, the strong jaw, the troubled eyes. "When I first saw you at the station, I thought you were just another society widow. Fragile. Sheltered. I did not expect you to be." He paused, searching for the word. "Impossible," I suggested. "Remarkable." He said it quietly, as though the word cost him something. "You have more courage than any woman I have ever known. More than any man, for that matter." I felt heat rise to my cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "You do not know me, my lord. I know enough." He reached out and took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. "I know that you have lost everything, and yet you refuse to give up. I know that you walk into danger without flinching. I know that you climb down a drainpipe in the dark rather than surrender." I was terrified, I admitted. So was I. His grip tightened. "When I saw you on that ledge, when I thought you might fall, I have not been that frightened since." He stopped. "Since Arabella." He nodded. "After she died, I told myself I would never care for anyone again. It was easier that way, safer. But then you came to my house and demanded answers, and you looked at me with those eyes, and I knew I was lost." "Marcus," I whispered. He raised my hand to his lips, as he had done before, but this time he did not let go. He turned my hand over and pressed a kiss to my palm, and the sensation shot through me like lightning, warming places that had been cold for years. "Tomorrow we may die," he said. "I wanted you to know, before we do, that these past days have been the first time I have felt alive since I lost her." I leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate and hungry, full of all the fear and longing and hope that had been building between us since that first night at the station. His arms came around me, pulling me close, and I felt the strength of him, the warmth, the solid reality of a man who had seen me at my weakest and my strongest and wanted me anyway. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. His forehead rested against mine, and I could feel his heart pounding, matching the rhythm of my own. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "I will not let them hurt you. I swear it on my life." I touched his face, traced the line of his jaw, "And I swear that we will bring them to justice, for Thomas, for Arabella, for Edward, for everyone they have harmed." He kissed me again, softer this time, a promise rather than a plea. Then he pulled back and stood, his expression settling back into the controlled mask I had come to know. "You should sleep," he said. "Tomorrow will be difficult." I did not want to sleep. I wanted to stay here by the fire, wrapped in his arms, pretending that the morning would never come. But he was right. We needed our strength for what lay ahead. I went to the small bed in the corner of the cottage, and he settled into the chair I had vacated, his eyes fixed on the dying flames. I watched him for a long moment, this complicated, wounded, honorable man who had somehow become the center of my world. "Marcus," I said softly. He turned to look at me. "Thank you. For everything." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "Sleep, Eleanor. Dream of victory." I closed my eyes and slept. And in my dreams, Thomas was free, and Marcus was beside me, and the future stretched out before us like a road leading home. Tomorrow we would fight. Tonight I would rest in the knowledge that I was no longer alone. Blackmore House rose from the moors like a wound in the landscape. It was a grim, sprawling structure of gray stone and iron bars, its windows dark even in the moonlight, and as we approached on horseback, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November wind. Marcus reined in his horse at the edge of the tree line, and I stopped beside him. "According to the map, there is a servant's entrance on the eastern side," he said quietly. "It is the least guarded. We go in there, find the prisoners, and get out before anyone raises the alarm. And if someone does raise the alarm, then we fight." He looked at me, his gray eyes steady. "Stay close to me. Do not take unnecessary risks." I nodded, though we both knew that everything about this night was an unnecessary risk. We had left our horses tied in a copse a quarter-mile back and continued on foot, moving through the shadows like ghosts. Marcus had brought 2 pistols and a knife. I had refused a weapon, knowing I would be more hindrance than help if it came to violence. My role was to find Thomas. Marcus's role was to protect me while I did. The servant's entrance was exactly where the map had indicated, a small door set into the eastern wall, half hidden by overgrown hedges. There was a single guard, a heavy-set man dozing on a stool, a lantern guttering at his feet. Marcus dealt with him quickly and silently, a blow to the head that sent him slumping forward without a sound. I tried not to look at the blood. Inside, the house was a maze of narrow corridors and locked doors. The smell was terrible, a mixture of carbolic acid and unwashed bodies and something else, something that spoke of despair. I heard sounds as we moved through the darkness, moans, weeping, the shuffle of feet behind barred doors. This was not a sanatorium. This was a prison for the inconvenient, a place where people were sent to be forgotten. We climbed a flight of stairs and found ourselves in a wider hallway, lined with doors that had small barred windows set into them. I peered through the first one and saw a woman huddled on a narrow cot, her hair matted, her eyes vacant. Through the second, a man pacing back and forth, muttering to himself. Through the third, nothing but darkness. The fourth door held my brother. I recognized him immediately, even though he had changed. Thomas had always been slender, but now he was gaunt, his cheeks hollow, his eyes sunken. He sat on the edge of his cot with his head in his hands, and when I whispered his name through the bars, he looked up as though he had seen a ghost. "Eleanor?" His voice cracked. "Eleanor? Is that you? I am here." I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking. "Marcus, I need the key." Marcus was already moving down the hall, checking doors, looking for a guard station or an office where keys might be kept. He returned moments later with a ring of iron keys, and we tried them one by one until the lock clicked open. Thomas was in my arms before I could speak. He was trembling, sobbing against my shoulder, and I held him as tightly as I could, breathing in the familiar scent of him beneath the grime and fear. "I thought you were dead," he said. "They told me you were dead. They told me everyone was dead, and I was the only one left. I am here," I said. "I am alive, and I am taking you home." We did not have time for a proper reunion. Marcus was already at the next door, unlocking it, helping a dazed young woman to her feet. "Catherine," Thomas gasped, and I realized this was his bride, the auburn-haired girl from his letters. She was thin and pale, her dress torn, but she was alive. "We have to free the others," Marcus said. "There are dozens of them." "We cannot take them all," I said. "There is not enough time. Then we take as many as we can." We worked frantically, unlocking doors, guiding confused and frightened passengers into the hallway. Some of them could barely walk. Others refused to leave, too broken by their captivity to believe that rescue had come. We gathered everyone we could, a group of perhaps 20 souls, and we led them toward the servants' entrance. We almost made it. The alarm bell began to ring when we were halfway down the stairs. Shouts echoed through the house, and I heard the thunder of boots on stone floors. Marcus pushed me behind him, drawing his pistol. "Get them out," he said. "I will hold them off. I cannot leave you. You can, and you will." His voice was fierce. "Thomas needs you. Catherine needs you. These people need you. Go." He kissed me then, hard and fast, and then he was gone, running toward the sound of the guards, drawing them away from our escape route. I led the prisoners through the servants' entrance and out into the night. The cold air hit us like a wall, and several of them stumbled, weakened by their captivity. Thomas took one arm of an elderly man who could not walk unaided. Catherine supported a young mother who clutched an infant to her chest. Together, we moved as quickly as we could toward the tree line. Behind us, I heard gunshots. I did not look back. I could not. If I looked back, I would run to him, and everything we had fought for would be lost. We reached the horses. There were only 2, not nearly enough for everyone, but the strongest of the prisoners could walk. I put the weakest on horseback and sent Thomas ahead with them, giving him directions to the cottage where Whittle waited. "I am going back," I told him. "Eleanor, no. He saved us. I will not abandon him." I ran. The house was chaos when I reached it. Guards were shouting, lanterns swinging wildly in the darkness, and somewhere inside I could hear the crack of gunfire. I slipped through the servants' entrance and followed the sounds of battle. I found Marcus in the main hall, his back against a wall, his pistol empty. 3 guards lay on the floor, unconscious or worse, but more were coming. He was bleeding from a wound on his arm, his face pale with pain and exhaustion. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. The guards turned, distracted for just a moment, and Marcus moved. He was across the hall in an instant, his fist connecting with the nearest man's jaw, sending him sprawling. The second guard raised his club, but I threw myself at him, clawing at his face, biting his hand when he tried to push me away. He howled and dropped the club, and Marcus finished him with a blow to the temple. The third guard ran. We stood in the wreckage of the hall, breathing hard, surrounded by fallen men. Marcus looked at me with an expression I could not read. "I told you to leave," he said. "I do not take orders well." He laughed, a broken sound, and pulled me into his arms. "You impossible woman. You magnificent, impossible woman." We fled into the night, supporting each other, stumbling through the darkness toward safety. By the time we reached the cottage, dawn was breaking over the hills, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Thomas was there, and Catherine, and all the prisoners we had rescued. Whittle was tending to the injured, his face lit with triumph. "It is over," I said, but it was not over, not yet. 3 days later, we rode into London with Whittle's documents and 20 witnesses to the crimes of Sir Reginald Hartley and Cecil Drummond. The scandal was immediate and spectacular. The newspapers called it the greatest railway conspiracy in English history. Hartley was arrested at his club, Drummond at his country estate. Both were tried and convicted, sentenced to decades in prison for fraud, corruption, and murder. The Earl of Ravensfield was called to testify. He told the truth, all of it, including his own unwitting involvement as an investor. Some called for his prosecution, but the witnesses spoke in his defense. He had saved them, they said. He had risked everything to set them free. In the end, he was cleared of all charges, though his reputation in society was forever tarnished. He did not seem to care. We were married in the spring, in the small chapel at Ravensfield Manor, with Thomas and Catherine as our witnesses. The Dowager Countess attended, her expression inscrutable, though I caught her wiping her eyes when Marcus slipped the ring onto my finger. After the ceremony, we walked through the gardens, the first flowers of the season blooming around us, and Marcus told me something he had never told anyone. Arabella, he said, would have liked you. She was fierce like you. She would have admired your courage. I took his hand. I wish I could have known her. In a way, you do. He looked at me with those storm-gray eyes, softer now than they had ever been. Everything good in me, everything that loves you, she helped shape. I was a better man for having loved her, and I will be a better man still for loving you. I kissed him in the garden, beneath a sky full of spring light, and I felt something I had not felt in years, perhaps ever. I felt whole. Thomas and Catherine were married that summer, in a ceremony far grander than ours, attended by half the county. They settled at Ashworth House, filling those empty rooms with laughter and love, just as Thomas had promised in his letters. Catherine was everything he had said and more, kind and clever, and possessed of a wit that could make me laugh until I cried. The following winter, I gave birth to a son. We named him Edward, after my first husband, the man who had died trying to expose the truth. It was Marcus's idea. He wanted to honor the courage of the man who had come before him, the man who had given his life for what was right. I held my son in my arms and looked at the man I had married, this complicated, wounded, honorable man who had fought through his grief to find love again, and I understood something I had not understood before. We do not choose our losses. We do not choose the tragedies that shape us, the sorrows that break us, the darkness that threatens to consume us. But we can choose what we do with them. We can choose to close ourselves off, to let the grief harden into walls that keep everyone out. Or we can choose to open ourselves again, to risk everything for the chance of something beautiful. Marcus had made that choice. So had I. And in the end, that was what saved us both. Years later, when our son was grown and Thomas's children filled Ashworth House with their own laughter, I sometimes thought about that night at the station. The empty train, the silence that poured from those carriages like water from a broken vessel, the beginning of everything. If the train had arrived with its passengers, I would never have asked questions. I would never have met Marcus, never have uncovered the conspiracy, never have found my way to this life of love and purpose and joy. The train arrived without its passengers, and because it did, I found my way home. I found my way to him, to Marcus, my Earl, my love, the man who had hidden the document not to protect the guilty, but to save the innocent, the man who had saved me. On quiet evenings, when the fire burned low and the house was still, I would sit beside him and rest my head on his shoulder, and he would take my hand in his, and we would watch the flames dance in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked me once. "The danger, the scandal, everything you risked." I thought about it. I thought about Edward, about Arabella, about all the lives that had been lost, and all the lives that had been saved. I thought about Thomas and Catherine and their children. I thought about our son, sleeping peacefully upstairs, dreaming the dreams of the young and the innocent. No, I said, I would do it all again. He kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it made my heart ache. So would I, he said, every moment of it. And that was enough. That was everything.